On July 30th, 2025, the United States Supreme Court delivered a landmark decision, halting the Trump-era tariffs that had upended global trade for years and sparked intense debate across the political spectrum. In a sweeping opinion, the court ruled that the executive branch had overstepped its constitutional authority, striking down a key pillar of the former president's economic policy and sending a clear message about the limits of presidential power. Global markets reacted instantly. Stock futures soared, and the US dollar swung wildly as investors anticipated a return to normalized trade. The decision sent shockwaves through financial centers from New York to London and beyond. For businesses, from Midwest farms to global corporations, the ruling marks a dramatic shift in the economic landscape. Many companies, long burdened by uncertainty, now face a new era of opportunity and risk. Years of uncertainty have ended, but new questions about America's trade future have emerged. Business leaders and economists are now debating what comes next as the nation redefines its role in the global economy. The case began with small businesses challenging the tariffs and grew into a constitutional showdown. Could a president unilaterally impose sweeping tariffs under a national emergency, or does Congress hold that power? The Supreme Court's answer, a decisive no, has set a new legal standard for future administrations. This verdict reasserts Congress's role in trade and sets a precedent that will echo for decades, shaping how future trade disputes and executive actions are handled. The impact will be global, affecting prices, alliances, and the very structure of international commerce. Countries around the world are now reassessing their trade strategies in response. The nation now faces the challenge of unwinding complex trade barriers and repairing relationships with key partners, a process that will require careful diplomacy and negotiation. The Supreme Court's ruling is not an end, but the start of a new, uncertain chapter in global commerce, one that will test America's leadership and adaptability in a rapidly changing world. To fully grasp the significance of the Supreme Court's recent ruling, we must revisit the origins and motivations behind the controversial tariffs that sparked this legal battle. The Trump administration invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, a law passed in 1977. They argued that national security threats justified imposing sweeping tariffs on goods from China, the European Union, Canada, and Mexico, America's major trading partners. By relying on the IEEPA, the administration was able to bypass Congress entirely, implementing tariffs quickly and unilaterally, without the usual legislative debate or approval. Critics, including lawmakers and legal scholars, argued this was a misuse of emergency powers, tools meant for genuine, immediate crises, not for addressing long-standing trade disputes or economic disagreements. The resulting lawsuit, VOS Selections versus United States, directly challenged whether the president could use the IEEPA to sidestep Congress's constitutional authority over trade policy and tariffs. Plaintiffs insisted that the Constitution clearly gives Congress, not the president, the exclusive power to regulate foreign commerce and impose duties, as outlined in the Commerce Clause. This legal fight quickly became a high-stakes test of executive power versus legislative authority, raising fundamental questions about the separation of powers in American government. The Supreme Court's decision has now drawn a clear and definitive line. Emergency powers cannot be used to reshape trade policy at will or circumvent Congress's role. This landmark ruling redefines who truly controls American trade, reinforcing the constitutional balance between the branches of government. The tariff debate split the nation. Supporters saw tariffs as vital for protecting American jobs and confronting unfair practices, especially by China. They argued the president needed flexibility to act swiftly in the face of economic threats. Opponents, including importers and farmers, called the tariffs a self-inflicted wound, raising costs, disrupting supply chains, and inviting retaliation. Legally, challengers warned that a broad definition of emergency would let any president bypass Congress on economic issues. The fight was about more than economics. It was about defending the rule of law and the balance of power. The Supreme Court's ruling has now set a precedent against executive overreach. The legal battle began in the U.S. Court of International Trade, which sided with the plaintiffs, ruling the president exceeded IEEPA authority. The government appealed, and the Federal Circuit reversed the decision, deferring to the executive on national security. This setback sent the case to the Supreme Court, which agreed to hear it due to its constitutional significance. The justices faced a central question: what qualifies as a true national emergency? In a 6-3 decision, the court ruled that ongoing economic challenges do not justify emergency powers. The ruling established a stricter test for invoking IEEPA. Threats must be specific and immediate, not general policy disagreements. The Supreme Court reversed the Federal Circuit, affirming limits on presidential power. The long legal odyssey ended with the decisive check on executive authority. The Supreme Court's announcement sent shockwaves through financial markets. Stocks in manufacturing, retail, and tech surged, while some protected industries like steel saw declines. The US dollar fluctuated as traders recalibrated to the new trade landscape. Billions in tariffs stopped being collected immediately, offering relief to importers. Customs agents received orders to halt duties, and companies relying on imports saw their costs drop overnight. The question of refunding previously collected tariffs, over $200 billion, remains unresolved and could spark new legal battles. International leaders responded with cautious optimism, calling for renewed cooperation. The European Union hailed the decision as a win for rules-based trade. China expressed hope for improved relations. The world is now adjusting to the sudden removal of major trade barriers. The stage is set for a new era in global commerce. The Supreme Court's decision is reverberating worldwide. Economists predict a boost to global GDP as trade flows normalize and uncertainty fades. The ruling offers a chance to repair strained alliances with Canada, Mexico, and the EU, moving from confrontation to cooperation. U.S. industries dependent on global supply chains, like autos and electronics, anticipate lower costs and greater stability. American farmers, hit hard by retaliatory tariffs, look forward to regaining lost markets. Not all effects are positive. Domestic industries that benefited from protection now face renewed foreign competition. Policymakers must help these sectors adjust, ensuring the gains from freer trade are widely shared. The decision presents both opportunities and challenges for the global economy. The world is watching how the U.S. navigates this new landscape. Legal and economic experts across the country are weighing in on the far-reaching significance of the Supreme Court's recent ruling. The decision has sparked intense debate in both academic and policy circles, with many calling it a turning point in the balance of power between the executive and legislative branches. Dr. Amelia Vance, a leading constitutional law scholar, describes the case as a defining moment for the separation of powers. She emphasizes that the ruling sends a clear message. The president's authority in trade matters is not without limits and must be exercised within the framework set by Congress. According to Dr. Vance, this clarification could have ripple effects on future executive actions. Mark Zandi, chief economist at Moody's, points out that ending the tariffs functions much like a broad tax cut. He explains that this move is likely to stimulate economic growth, lower costs for both businesses and consumers, and potentially increase competitiveness for American companies in global markets. The Cato Institute, a prominent think tank, notes that the decision will require future presidents to collaborate more closely with Congress on trade policy. This effectively ends the era of unilateral tariff action, making it harder for any single administration to impose sweeping trade measures without legislative approval. This shift is expected to result in more predictable and carefully negotiated trade policies, which could foster greater stability in international markets and improve relationships with key trading partners. However, some analysts caution that the ruling could weaken America's ability to respond swiftly to unfair trade practices or sudden economic threats from abroad, potentially putting U.S. industries at risk. They argue that Congress, often hampered by partisanship or slow-moving legislative processes, may be too divided or sluggish to act decisively in times of crisis, leaving gaps in protection for American interests. The ongoing debate highlights deep divisions over the best strategies to protect American jobs and industries, with some favoring strong executive action and others advocating for more democratic oversight. Ultimately, the ruling rebalances power toward Congress, restoring the constitutional vision of legislative oversight in trade matters and reinforcing the system of checks and balances. The long-term impact of this landmark decision will depend on how effectively policymakers adapt to the new framework and whether they can rise above partisan divides to craft sound trade policy. One thing is certain: the legacy of this decision will shape the direction of U.S. trade policy and its role in the global economy for many years to come. With the court's decision, the U.S. enters a new era of trade policy. The administration and Congress must now unwind tariffs and negotiate the removal of retaliatory barriers abroad. Businesses face tough choices, whether to shift supply chains back or continue diversifying to reduce risk. The trend toward supply chain resilience is likely to accelerate. Congress, now back in control of trade, will debate new policies to address issues like intellectual property theft and trade imbalances. The end of tariffs will benefit many, but some workers in protected industries may face job losses. Policymakers must support these communities with retraining and safety nets. The challenge is to harness the gains of freer trade while protecting the most vulnerable. The Supreme Court's decision closes a chapter of economic nationalism and opens one of opportunity and uncertainty. It reaffirms that presidential power has limits, even in turbulent times. The legacy of the tariff era is complex, raising vital questions about globalization, manufacturing, and America's role in the world. The challenge now is to address these issues through lawful, collaborative means. The end of the tariff war offers a chance to rebuild alliances and restore faith in global cooperation. The world will watch as the U.S. charts its next course. The story of American trade is far from over.